From Chicago's CAN TV, this is Chicago Newsroom.
Hi, I'm Craig Newman, sitting in for Ken Davis on Chicago Newsroom, and I'm being joined by Louise Kiernan and Jason Grotto from ProPublica, not ProPublica, as we were just discussing. They are a relatively recent player in the city, looking at investigative reporting, public policy, really digging into the dirt behind the city and the state politics. So welcome to the show.
Thank you for having us.
You bet. Louise, you are the editor-in-chief. I hope maybe we could spend a moment or two just talking about what ProPublica is. I almost did it. And maybe explain to some of the newsroom viewers what the mission is. This is the first opening of a ProPublica newsroom outside of the main structure of the organization, which is based in New York, correct?
That's true. So ProPublica is a New York-based nonprofit, nonpartisan investigative journalism organization. We started in 2008 at a time when there was great concern about the future of investigative journalism as legacy newsrooms were beginning to really start to struggle. And so in the 10 years that we've been in existence, we have won 4 Pulitzer Prizes. We're the first digital-only operation to win a Pulitzer Prize. And we've done a number of stories on all sorts of topics, but with one overriding mission, and that is to spur change through journalism.
So it's, I don't know if advocacy is the right word, but it's certainly got a public bent towards enacting some sort of movement within.
I would say that our, we're advocates for truth.
Okay.
Not advocates.
Okay. Truth is good. I like
Truth is good.
And before that, you've been at Northwestern teaching for a while, and before that, again, at the Trib for a number of years as a reporter and editor.
That's true. I worked for the Chicago Tribune for 18 years, beginning as an intern, and then I went through a number of other positions, including at the time I left in 2010, I was the newspaper's enterprise editor.
Okay. So why Illinois?
So Illinois for 3 reasons, and just
not that we don't need investigative reporting here. That's not what I'm saying.
Well, actually, that is reason number 1. When we were thinking about expanding and building regional operations, we looked at a number of different places, and really there were 3 criteria that we had in mind. The first was we needed somewhere where there are investigative stories to be told, and I don't think anyone who lives here in Chicago or in Illinois would not agree that there are many investigative stories out there that need to be told. Second, we are a collaborative organization. We do most of our work in partnership with other media organizations. So we needed a place where the journalism ecosystem was still strong enough for us to do that. And third, the goal for us is to be 100% locally funded. So we were also looking for a place where there was a strong history of philanthropic support for journalism and for other causes, and we found that here as well.
Chicago is kind of an interesting media city. It's obviously a large city. We've got a couple of newspapers. The rivalry there is historic, but maybe not as robust as it used to be. Both newsrooms have gone through a lot of change and downsizing. TV stations, same deal. What are the challenges as the editor and the driver behind the Illinois-based operation to bring a thriving culture of investigative reporting back? Both the newspapers do a very good job with investigations. They're obviously short on staff, as all newsrooms are. You guys are not a large newsroom. How do those partnerships work, and how do you see this duality unfolding over the course of the next few months and years?
Well, first I'll say that our goal is very much to help support and strengthen the journalism ecosystem here. We have been publishing just for 12 weeks, but we've already partnered with both the Tribune and the Sun-Times, as well as WBEZ, and also several smaller journalism nonprofits as well. So we think that the way to make journalism work here is for us to all work together in terms of where
Which is not a traditional model.
It's not a traditional model, but I do think it's a model that has really gained acceptance since ProPublica started 10 years ago. When ProPublica started, that was very unusual. Now, I think if you look out on the journalism landscape nationally, you see many, many more organizations seeing partnership as a way to strengthen journalism. And so for us, where I think we fit into the landscape here in Illinois is we are looking for stories that other people aren't telling, stories that we can bring our unique set of strengths to.
And some of those strengths are a great data reporting ability, and some other areas that you can really dig in that newsrooms just can't or can't afford the time to do. And you guys are a little bit more free because you don't have to produce daily, correct me if I'm wrong, but you can take a step back and really look at stories that need some attention and need a little bit of time to report out. The traditional investigative teams that you would see at newsrooms in the days gone by. Speaking of, Jason, you've been following Joe Berrios, the Cook County Assessor, for a bit now. Yeah. I wonder, and he did us a favor, he's in the news again today. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about your reporting on Berrios and how ProPublica's model in particular has helped kind of foster your path that way.
Sure. So, well, I started this project on the Cook County assessment system with the Tribune, actually, and reported on it at the Tribune for almost 2 years. We published our first 3 parts in June, and then when I moved over to ProPublica in July, we had already kind of worked out that we would continue the reporting in partnership with the Tribune, and the editors over there have been great, and it's been some growing pains and some things to iron out. But for the most part, we feel like the partnership has worked really well. As you said, one of the key things about ProPublica that sort of attracted me to it was the resources that they've put behind data analysis. So that's something that I've specialized in throughout my career. And, the Tribune, because they have to put out a daily newspaper every day because they cover the entire sort of county and some of the collar counties, their resources in terms of what they're able to bring to the table for somebody like me, they're just not as robust as a news organization that started in 2008 and sort of built up from scratch, where they put a lot of resources into the data reporting. So when I did my analysis with my colleague at ProPublica on the commercial and industrial stories, which we did in December, that was all reviewed by our data team in New York. So it's just you have this kind of other layer of oversight, another layer of sort of fact checking and things that sort of just make you sleep a little bit more soundly at night. I still don't sleep very well, but a little bit more soundly at night, as the stories are rolling out.
Oh, we got plenty of problems why we shouldn't sleep well at night.
Exactly.
So you've been on Berrios' case for some time now, pre and post ProPublica.
Yeah.
There's a tongue twister. I think most of our viewers probably know a bit about Joe, but why don't you give us the Cliff Notes version of who he is, what he does, and why we should care?
Sure. Well, Mr. Berrios was the first Hispanic state legislature. He got his start in politics many, many years ago, sort of working his way up through the machine organization with the Democratic Party. He's now the chairman of the Cook County Democratic Party, which makes him one of the most powerful politicians in the state, and I think that's...
And kind of quietly one.
Quietly,
very
that's
behind-the-scenes
correct.
power.
That's right. He left the state legislature. He wasn't there that long and ended up actually becoming a member of the Cook County Board of Review, which is sort of a separate entity that oversees assessment appeals and sort of certifies all the assessments. And he was there for 20 years. And while he was there, he was had a really robust campaign finance capacity. So he raised a lot of money if you look at him compared to other Board of Review members or even the assessor at the time, James Houlihan. For many years when he was there, he raised a lot of money. And then when Mr. Houlihan, the previous assessor, left announced his retirement in actually, I think it was April of 2009, Mr. Berrios ran for assessor, and he's been assessor since December 2010.
And maybe you can take us through a couple of the points for why he's become a bit of a lightning rod. I mean, we briefly talked about the idea that he's behind the scenes power broker. He's obviously got ties in a lot of areas in the state and Cook County, clearly, but why is a assessor important here, and what about Joe Berrios has become an issue big enough that somebody like you would be bird dogging him?
Sure. Well, first of all, assessments are crucial and touch every single person in in the county. Even if you're a renter, the rent you pay is going to be somewhat predicated on what your property tax is. So that's number one. I think, but it's a quiet office. It's not one that gets a lot of attention, but it's one of the more powerful.
You get your quarterly tax assessments. You get it every now and then.
Every
you hear
3
about
years,
it.
you get a notice, say this is what we value your house at, and that's going to impact your property tax.
Although that's a whole another question because nobody knows how that actually happens, but we can get into that.
Yeah. And so, so that's number one. It's just a very powerful office, but it's kind of behind the shadows. Number two, Mr. Berrios has raised a lot of money relative to other assessors, so he's very active in terms of raising campaign funds, and that's happened at a time when appeals to the property tax or the property tax assessments have gone way up, and the number of people who win those appeals have also gone way up, and so there's this nexus that everyone has talked about for many years. I think the thing that was different that we brought to the table is we really got into the weeds on the technical side of how assessments are done. And really, spent a lot of time figuring out, using industry standards, how to measure the fairness and accuracy of assessments. And during Mr. Berrios' tenure, the sort of scores for fairness and accuracy have been terrible. So the biggest issue that we found was that there's high levels of regressivity in the system. And what that means is low-valued properties are overassessed, and high-value properties are underassessed. And so that has all kinds of implications for how the tax burden shifts in the county. Now, the assessor's office for many years has had problems, but during this period, it's just been egregious. And so we were able to sort of track that. The other issue is that on the residential front, the assessor's office had put out a press release in 2015 saying that they had adopted a new state-of-the-art residential assessment model that improved accuracy by 50% and decreased regressivity by 25%. Our analysis found that, in fact, they never actually implemented the model. So that's another issue. There have been any number of instances where the assessor's office has misled the public. After our stories came out, one of the officials from the assessor's office trotted out some emails saying that they had told the people who built the model that they weren't using it. Well, these other people provided a bunch of emails that showed it was totally wrong. The assessor's office put out a study from a national group saying that, sort of framing the study as it proved that they were doing a good job with assessments. Well, we called this national group and they said, actually, that's not what our study does at all. They ended up having to take it down. So it's just this sort of constant drumbeat of misinformation that we've sort of been able to, poke holes in.
It's interesting, the reporting on the assessor's office and on Berrios in particular over the years, probably what most people knew him for was rampant nepotism within the office. I lost count how many family members or close friends he has working around there. But I think the reporting lately has been much more looking at just what is happening with the process and how it impacts people within the city and the county. Do you see that the pendulum is starting to swing the other direction? He's been traditionally a strong power behind the scenes. Obviously, the money raising helps him stay in that position. But is there more accountability starting to come down the pipe? There's been ethics charges. There's been some findings against him in some official capacity, although certainly nothing binding or hard hitting. Where are we going with Joe Berrios as tax assessor?
I mean, it's very tough to say. I think it's a testament to the power that he does have within the party, that he's still sort of standing and putting up what will prove to be a very contentious primary campaign.
And I should ask too, sorry for interrupting, but who are his friends? He's certainly got some very powerful names that have stood behind him and stand with him.
The county board president, Toni Preckwinkle, is the vice chair of the Cook County Democratic Party, and she's provided, some people would argue that she's provided some cover for Mr. Berrios because, he was brought before the county board after our first wave of stories came out, and before the hearing ever even started, Ms. Preckwinkle, put out a notice that she was going to study the system. So right away, that becomes the lead of every story. Not that Mr. Berrios was being hauled before the county board. Now that study is kind of in limbo. Nobody knows when it's going to come out. Is it going to come out after the primary, before the primary? We just don't know. There was actually a hearing yesterday where some county commissioners were trying to forced Mr. Berrios to come back to the finance committee of the county board to explain where the study is, and that was voted down. So I think it shows sort of when the party is in trouble, the way they're able to circle the wagons.
And obviously, there's politicians around the state, some very powerful ones, who make a lot of money on contesting assessments, contesting tax.
So that's his other sort of area of support. House Speaker Michael Madigan is a close ally of Mr. Berrios and a property tax attorney. Alderman Ed Burke, who's been the finance chair for 30 or 40 years, also a property tax attorney, heavily involved in the party. There's Mart Wicks, are also involved. And so there's any number of very powerful politicians throughout the state that either assess property taxes or have had some role in the property tax assessment system.
Not to put you on the spot, but it almost sounds like there's a system that's been created that it's disadvantageous to be torn down by a lot of the people who decide these sort of things. If Joe Berrios gets voted out of office, he gets removed some way or another, does that change anything?
I mean, I think that'll be the big question. It's definitely, so this was a system that was in place long before Mr. Berrios, came into office. In fact, for years, one of the things we found in the third part of our series was that long before Mr. Berrios came to office, the assessor was actually systematically undervaluing every residential home in the county, making everyone think, oh, I'm getting this great deal because they're undervaluing my house. In fact, everyone was getting the same deal, and they were undervaluing commercial and industrial even more. And so, in fact, what we found is toward the end that homeowners ended up paying more than they would have if they just valued everyone accurately. So, there's been a long history with this office of manipulating numbers and not being straight up with the public. So, and that is because, as one source who's done a lot of work in politics in the county described it as an ecosystem. And, there's
if I, as a homeowner and a taxpayer, want to go down to the office and figure out how they assess the value of my house, it's not anywhere close to that easy, if even possible.
No, and in fact, the Tribune, while I was there, we ended up suing the assessor to try to get some of that vital information of how it's done. We were able to crack the nut on some of the residential stuff. We didn't get the full picture, so we've sued to get some of those things. For commercial and industrial, they refused to release any detailed information about how they value the property. So we won in circuit court, but now, of course, the assessor's appealing to the appellate court, and that's going to cost taxpayers as it moves up the legal chain,
Sure.
so to speak.
It's like figuring out the Facebook algorithm.
Yes.
Something happens, you just don't know why,
Exactly.
and then it shows up in your feed at some point.
Exactly.
So, Louise, I wonder if we could, it's been some great work that he's been doing, continuing doing. What's kind of next on the radar for ProPublica? I know you guys had a big story out today that I was trying to read just before I got in here and didn't really get a chance to pour through, but I bet you know it better than I do anyway.
So we just published a story this morning in partnership with the Chicago Sun-Times about how the government watchdog group Project 6, which calls itself independent and was founded just about 2 years ago.
It's a great name. It's very X-Filesian, but
It was founded just about 2 years ago by the former Inspector General for the city. It's an organization that investigates government wrongdoing. Its investigations have gotten a fair amount of public attention. It does not publish who its funders are. It keeps those secret. And we actually discovered that 98% of the funding for this organization in its first year of existence came from one source, and that source is the Illinois Policy Institute, which is very much a conservative force in politics here in Illinois.
I know there's a couple of these shadow organizations, maybe is a little strong, but there are a number of these politically oriented organizations that have been popping up around the state. Is this something that you're starting to see in terms of financial backing or other types of backing cropping up around some groups like the Project 6? Or these Project 6 type organizations themselves that are kind of cropping up out of nowhere?
I describe it as an area of interest for us.
Okay, so we should keep clicking at ProPublica.org, right?
Yes, exactly.
Right. I think we're running out of time here, so I want to thank you both very much for stopping by. Louise Kiernan, Jason Grotto from ProPublica. This has been Chicago Newsroom. I'm Craig Newman. I believe Ken Davis will be back next week, and thanks very much for joining us.